Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. I hope everyone watching is having a great 2017 so far. Today's video is going to be something of a departure from the videos I've made up until this point, because so far I've only discussed watches made by dedicated watch manufacturers, watch companies per se, and this video is about some watches from Eaglemoss, which isn't really one of those. Now, specifically, these watches are from the Eaglemoss Military Watch collection, which is one of those collectible magazine things, so you picked up each issue of the magazine monthly, I believe, for about £10, or just over that price, and with that package you got a watch with each magazine, so you could build up a substantial collection of these watches in short order, and there were also display boxes that you could buy separately, and special edition watches at a slightly higher price. I believe they were around £25. And one of the Eaglemoss watches I have here is one of those limited editions. So the distinction between these watches and watches from actual watch manufacturers leads us to the main reason for making this video, which is that because these aren't made by a dedicated watch company, the quality and the aesthetic value of these watches does vary considerably, and there's a lot to say about the merits of the collection overall. So perhaps the first thing to say here is that this isn't a video about the entire Eaglemoss collection. I do still have other watches from this collection than the ones I'm showing here, and I owned and let go of even more. So the watches you see here are the ones that I do think have something in particular to offer. Now, as I said in my channel philosophy video that I made a while back, I think the best way to ensure positivity on the channel is that I simply won't show a watch that I don't think has any merit, or in which the liabilities outweigh any merits that do exist. So the best way to think of this video is as a video on these specific watches from the Eaglemoss collection, rather than as a video about the collection overall. So the point of this video is really to bring some balance and specificity to the conversation about these watches. Not because other reviewers haven't, but many reviews have slammed these watches, and I think unfairly, given their price and origin. Also, people talking on watch forums have done that. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's also too easy to neglect to point out certain negatives about these pieces, because people are motivated to be kind given the cost of these things and where they come from. I think the key thing to remember here is that Eaglemoss is a company that, in general, if you don't know them, makes toys and figurines. And if you buy a watch from a toy company for £10, there are many different ways to appreciate or disapprove of that watch, but comparisons with watches from actual watchmakers aren't really meaningful. So you won't hear me compare these to other watches and talk about how you can get much better objective quality out there for mere pounds on top of the cost of these pieces, because that isn't what should drive your interest in these watches if you do like them. So what's the basis on which you might want to consider these watches? What should drive your interest in them? The watches reference military watches from different time periods all over the world. They aren't strict replicas of any one particular watch, but they are very much in the styles of specific watches that you would have expected particular military forces to be issued. And of course, some of them are as close to being identical replicas as their nature allows. So the specific watches I have here are the 1960s French Navy watch, the 1960s German Naval Commander's watch, the 1960s Australian Diver's watch, and the 1940s Japanese Pilot's watch, and also the special edition 1970s Australian Navy watch. Now, these are obviously all quartz pieces using, I believe, a Seiko Epson movement, and clearly the appearance of these watches is the main point of them. But one thing I do feel it necessary to point out about their workings is that some of these watches do tick incredibly loudly. It's possible that you can even hear them in the background of this video. Like the house clock that you can always hear, so it's personal and subjective, but you might find that disconcerting. So, starting to look at the watches individually, and beginning with the German Naval Commander's watch, this is quite an attractive piece, and the general styling of the dial and the bezel are nice. The indices stand out and catch the eye. Of course, the lume is essentially non-existent, and that's the case with these watches in general in my experience. The other main liability is that the nylon strap is very rough, and all of the nylon straps on these watches are of roughly the same quality. Also, this is one of the watches that, as I just mentioned, does tick quite loudly. But apart from that, although this is by no means my favourite watch here, I do think it's worth keeping and sets a sort of baseline for the other ones I'm going to show, because all the other watches here have something to offer beyond this. So moving on to the French Navy watch, this is the next logical watch to look at here because it appears to use exactly the same case as the German naval commander's watch that I just showed. I should point out that this watch came with a similar nylon strap to the one on the German watch, and the weird strap it's currently on is just what I had lying around. I've said that all the watches shown from here on in offer something beyond what the German watch has to offer, and the first of these merits on this watch is the bezel. Now, the bezel on the German watch appears to be some kind of tin or chrome. It's certainly not, or doesn't appear to be, stainless steel, whereas this one's coated in some way, which gives a more ceramic than aluminium looking appearance. The styling of the dial is the other thing that I appreciate more about this watch, and it's clearly modelled on something like early Omega designs with the much bolder indices and the sword-style hands. Now, next up is the Australian Diver, which is easily my favourite of these watches, and it's the only one that I actually wear, and which sits next to real watches, if you like, rather than curiosity pieces in my collection. Now, as with the French watch, the strap you see on this piece is not the original. The original was the same kind of nylon that you saw on the German naval watch, but in a tan colour. In fact, you can tell that I do wear this watch because it's on a nice Adley Roma strap, which was easily several times the price of the watch itself, and I would say that a good strap really does make this watch come alive. Now, the best thing about this watch is undoubtedly the dial, the design of which is crazy and involved, but in a beautiful and tasteful way, and the subdued colours really help this effect. I also like the hands, which are perfectly appropriate for the dial design. Now, if I had to list two downsides of this watch, they would be that it's perhaps the loudest ticking piece here, and that the metal used is, although not bad, one of the more tinny feeling metals used by Eaglemoss. But these factors are massively outweighed by the beauty of the dial design. I don't think I've ever worn this watch without someone noticing it and complimenting the unique design. So obviously a lot of this is a matter of my personal taste, but coming from that perspective, if I were to recommend that you take a look at any one watch in this collection, this would be the piece. So the fourth watch I have here is the Japanese pilot's watch, and honestly this would have been a watch that I could wholeheartedly recommend if it weren't for the size, because not only does the dial have the same kind of unique styling benefits that I appreciated in the Australian Diver, but the strap is of unbelievable quality for a package that includes a magazine and watch for just over £10. In fact, I've only just put the strap back on this watch, and only for the purposes of this review, because I do regularly use the strap on other higher quality pieces that I wear more regularly. So the strap's very substantial, and you certainly wouldn't need to upgrade it in order to wear the watch. Having said all that, and although the size is really the only downside of this watch, it is an oversized watch even for an aviation-inspired piece, and the size does make it completely inappropriate for anyone who doesn't have very large wrists. So the final piece I have here is the Australian Navy Special Edition. Now, the best thing about this piece is undoubtedly its character, and in some ways I think that, although I can't imagine actually wearing this, it's the one piece in the Eaglemoss collection that best does the job it's supposed to do, which is to reference watches from different times and special contexts. This watch absolutely does that, and it's hard to imagine wearing anything that looked like this if you weren't in some kind of Navy in days past. So that's where this watch really succeeds. The two main liabilities here are that the bracelet is absolutely awful, although it looks nice enough if you see it from the front and you can't see the sides of the links, and that the sides of the case look brushed in an obviously cheap way. Even though this is the tallest watch I've ever seen, I'm not going to list that as a negative because it's a compelling aspect of that unique, crazy, standout character that I described as the main positive of the watch. So one thing that I can absolutely guarantee about this piece is that if you did actually use it for daily wear, you would never lack for a conversation starter again. People will notice this watch even from way across the room, and they will ask you about it. So again, that's a quick look at some specific pieces from the Eaglemoss collection. I haven't made this video to assess the collection as a whole. And honestly, I don't even know if the collection's still running, in the sense of whether you can get the magazines in shops and so on. One thing I do know is that you can eBay these pieces all day long for very reasonable prices, and you can generally pick up the entire collection that way, complete with the display boxes and the special edition pieces and so on. Okay, thanks guys, I'll leave it there and I'll see you in the next one.